Inflectra, which, how we do agile, how we do testing. We're not going to tell you this is a lecture. This is the future of testing. That's not what this is about. We have some ideas of what for us will be in the future, how we've found to make it work for us. We want it to be a discussion. We want you to challenge our ideas. Things that you found that worked, didn't work. If you hear something, you say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Let us know. This is meant to be a discussion. I am presenting, so please make it interactive. We want to learn as much as present. And so what we're going to do, well, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about who we are as a company, what drives us, what excites us, and why I started the company 10 years ago. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Agile, both a little bit of my history with Agile, and also how it has impacted testing specifically, and how we feel like it's, in many ways, testing is even though it's a core part of Agile, is underrepresented in many cases. And then the third one, which is sort of the controversial question, I guess, is where does testing go? What does it mean to be a tester? So we're going to talk about the future of testing, the types of tests that we think are going to exist in the future. But again, let us know, challenge us if you think that doesn't make sense. Before we begin, any questions? Everyone can hear my voice okay? I'm not speaking too fast or too slow. I have a tendency to speak fast, so let me know. Okay, so first of all, who are we? Well, it's very important for us to think about the why first before we talk about the how, because how is lots of companies have a how, but what drives us every day, why we come to work, why we're happy at work, is the why. And 10, 12 years ago, I used to work at a consulting firm called Sapient, and we used to do testing and project management, and I was actually working there to do project management. I was the chief architect for a lot of projects for the Navy, and one of the things we found was that we were trying to do the best work for our client, but we couldn't use tools that were effective. We had people running around with spreadsheets. There wasn't Google spreadsheets then, so it was actual real spreadsheets, and paper documents. Requirements were done on Gantt charts. We had giant plots the size of a wall printed out with project plans. Testers were writing these in Excel. Everything was done in Word or Excel, basically. If you're lucky, people would stay all night to take the results of all the testing that was being done every day and transcribe it into some Access database that they had built the week before to try and actually get the results back, so we could go to the client next morning and say, yeah, we had some bugs, we fixed some, we ran some tests, this is how we're looking. And we found this was insane. So we wanted to find some tools we could use, and we did find tools, things like Mercury Test Director, if you're familiar with that, and some really, really expensive tools. And the problem was, at the company, we couldn't use them. They were too expensive to use across the company. So my company, which was a consulting firm, hired a whole team to build their own tools. And this is repeated across the industry. People are building their own stuff all the time. And I thought, this is crazy, because as soon as you build it, they're going to put on another project, it's going to get orphaned and forgotten. And so at the time, I was like, this is crazy. I know that stuff's not that great. I could write it. So 11 years ago now, while I was on the metro train going to work, I started coding it myself and proved that you can build a business on the move. Before there were collaborative workspaces, the metro was my workspace. And so that's how the company started. And it was to basically provide tools for companies of all sizes, from a small startup to the big company like Sears, who need things to actually run their business. It's going to be easy to use, it's going to do everything they need, and it's not going to break the bank. And that for us has been, I think, what inspires us every day. When some small company, like a dairy in Vermont, that's like, well, we've got this website, we have to manage our supply chain. We're not software guys. We need something that's going to be easy to use and work for us. And they come and they tell us, this is great. This is really so much amazing for us to actually take control of what we're doing. And that's what inspires us every day. So what do we actually do? Well, there are borders around these, but the lights have faded them out. We basically build tools to do project management, requirements management, testing, automated testing and manual, and we also do help desk. So we have a platform to manage the entire life cycle. Someone asked me earlier on, are you a plugin for Jira? And we do integrate with tools like Jira, but we are also our own platform. So customers that want something that works out of the box with everything they need, this is the tool for them. If they're a tool company that already has Microsoft's Team Server, they already have Jira, they already have Slack, they already have a whole bunch of other tools, GitHub, that's great too. We integrate with all of those, so you don't have to make a choice. And that was an important part for us, was being open to the world, but not requiring you to become a systems integrator just to get things working. So, that's a little about us. Before I move on, any questions about us? I'm going to take more questions at the end. Okay, so back to what it was like in the olden days, 12 years ago, actually 15 years ago. So when I worked at Sapient 15 years ago, this is before Agile, we had some big products with the US Navy, and this was the kind of process we did. So what would happen is we'd write some requirements, and you probably know all this. You go, you write the requirements down, and then you would have them signed off by the client, and you spend a few months with the client signing it off. That was great. Then you'd go give it to the test manager or test QA analyst. They would write the test cases. They would kind of match the requirements. They would be signed off by the client. And then you give them to developers. The developers would do all the development, and the designs wouldn't work. The requirements didn't make sense. It would all kind of change, but not really. And then we give them to the testers. And this was now 6 months later. So the testers were like, oh, we've got a month to test this. It took you 6 months to build it. It took you 2 months to define it. And I see the testers are smiling. And you've got a month to test this thing. And it's your fault if it doesn't work. So, but no pressure. Don't worry. And so they would give it to the testers. The testers would be like, oh, test, all these bugs, all these problems. It wasn't integrated. And so it would kind of go live with a few patches or 20, and it kind of worked the next version. So the whole idea of Agile was you take requirements and you change them. You expect them to change. You build change into the process. And that's great. However, when you look at Agile, so I've got some diagrams here. I went on Pinterest about a few hours ago, and I'm like, well, what does it say on Pinterest for Agile? Well, you've got the typical Scrum methodology with release plan, your sprints, your user stories. That's great. Where do you see testing on that? I see one word, testing, just above integrated working system. Nowhere else. Interesting. And then I look at Kanban. So Kanban, great, continuous improvement work, managing the work, the flow of work in the process. It's also very good. You've got some defects, you've got some tasks, you've got user stories, you've got your work line, and you look at it and go, great, this makes sense. Where's testing? Well, there's some bugs there, and there's some testing, one of the steps. That's interesting. And then you look at this, which is the Agile QA process that I found on Pinterest also. And if you look at this, we've got the backlog of sprints, we begin the interaction, we write the user story, we kind of do an acceptance test, we deploy it, we test it, we do some meetings, and we keep going. Again, there's not much clarity in what does testing mean. So, if you go back to what it was like as a tester in the old days, at least you knew what you had to do. Someone gave you the test scripts, or you were the person writing them, and they had lots of steps, and you would go through and run all the steps and follow the steps, and did it meet the requirements, did it work? Now, you're like, well, the requirements, well, I don't know, are these requirements, are they done? And then, when you get into actually integrating the code, does it work, does it not work? It's very hard for the methodology of the testers to know exactly what you would do. What are you testing? Are you testing the system? Are the requirements ready? It's a very fluid system, but there's not a lot of guidance. So, what did we find? So we had the same challenge. We're a small company. We have only 1 or 2 full-time testers. The rest are developers, and the developers do some of the testing. So we have to be very careful with our resources. How do we make sure we test well? How do we get the best use out of everyone? And how do we give people structure, but also accept that there's change? So what we do is we have our requirements and user stories, and we have a code management system. We use a mixture of Subversion and Git, Subversion for some of the older stuff, Git for some of the newer stuff. Our team is partly located in our office here and partly in Russia, so we do have a distributed team, which presents some challenges. And we do write some acceptance tests with these stories. And then we have an automated test. So we have a continuous integration server running all the time, Jenkins. We have unit tests written in NUnit, MS test, and other unit testing frameworks depending on the language we're using. So at this point, on these 2 blocks, we've kind of got our automation, we've got these checks, we can test automatically some of the system. Then we had a problem. The problem is, how do we test the rest of the system? Because, and at least we'll talk about this more when we talk about testing, is that we can give her a piece of a product and say, look, all unit tests passed. She logs in and goes, it doesn't work, it doesn't let me log in, it's completely broken. You guys are idiots. And so, we're like, well, that's a problem. So what we found was, how do we take all the automated testing that we can do, and how do we actually test from that? Our requirements are some stories that describe roughly what it's going to do, but we haven't got the time to write out scripts for her. We haven't got the time to actually define the story in such detail that's going to make sense because it's changing. So we found at some conferences the idea of session-based testing, which is a form of exploratory testing, and we found that helped us fill the gap. And that was important for us because we do want to automate what we can. And automated testing is really important, but one of the problems is the price goes up the further up the stack you go. I've got some unit tests, I've got some code, I can write unit tests very easily that will test a good coverage of the units, of the code, the functions and the methods and the classes. If I've got APIs, got web services, I've got REST services, you know, some SOAP services too, we can write tests for all of that. It's easy to write computer code to test that. It doesn't take too long. Those are fairly stable. The code isn't changing constantly. The APIs definitely aren't changing constantly by design. But the UI, we redesign the UI all the time. You know, we get user feedback in. We want it to be adaptive. We want the UI to be constantly changing to reflect the improved user experience. But that means that if you spend a week writing tests, it can be obviously in 2 hours. So what we found was, for a lot of the UI, we don't want to invest in automation. We invest in automation where it makes sense, where we have things that aren't changing frequently, and where it's easier for a human. Sorry, it's easier for a machine. But for the rest, we want to we want to leverage what humans can do. We have a lot of unique skills. And so that leads me to the question, which is, if you are a tester, what is the future for you of testing? And one of the things we've been trying to figure out as a group is, you know, if you were to advise someone towards a tester who likes testing, where should they go? Should they become a programmer? Should they go into automation? So what we found was, depending on the personality and your skills and what you like to do, there are 3 kind of roles we see testers really being incredibly valuable in. If you're a tester, but you love understanding the business side, you love working with clients, you really want to understand how a system is meant to work, what the use cases are. It's a little bit about user experience, but it's about how a system is used, what's the functionality. As a user, you can work out how the test is meant to follow the process. So you could become a test analyst. You can be really good at helping to write the stories, taking what someone might write, and helping to frame it in a way that is understandable, that actually does help describe what the thing is meant to do. That's really valuable. That is testing. It isn't testing in the classic sense, but it is, in my mind at least, testing. The second thing is, if you like coding, you can write automated scripts. You can become an automation engineer. It gives you the ability to take what you like doing, which is breaking stuff, but you can break it faster. And I was thinking, the analogy is, if you like going to a screen with all these forms and fields, and you want to put in random amounts of gibberish into every field to see if it breaks, with a computer, you can do a lot more gibberish. You can try every character set under the sun. You can do a lot more exhaustive testing of those cases. And you can be like a madman. You can break everything thousands of times in every browser, in every operating system, very easy. But there's a third piece, and this is the piece that we really struggle with in some cases, because it's hard to quantify. There are a couple of people in our company who, you give them a computer screen, you give them an application, and you don't even tell them what it's meant to do. They can break it by looking at it. I mean, literally, they just start using it, and they're like, what do you do? How do you do that? I've never seen it do that. No one else can even reproduce what they did, but they can do it. And there are 2 people in our company, and they literally, you give them half an hour with any application, no test scripts, nothing. They will break it more efficiently than any computer, any other person, any automated script, or any checklist of steps to carry out. The problem is that's devalued. People call it monkey testing, and it's not. It's the opposite. Monkey testing is reading a script and going through it line by line. This is the phrase that what the industry is calling now is exploratory or session testing. There is a little difference, which Elise will talk to. But for us, it's really powerful. And we have to have that. And it's often forgotten, but it's incredibly valuable. And the question is, in your process, just because you have people who can write good tests, and you have great automation, and you even maybe have good scripts, without this last piece, you will fail. You won't find the things that you don't even know you're looking for. Sort of the Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns. And they're lurking in a system, and you won't know them until they hit you. And you know what? If you can find one of those before you go live with 10,000 users, it's a good thing. So people who have that inherent ability, don't hide it. Don't feel like, oh, I have to become a programmer, or I have to become an analyst. You have a skill, and I think you need to basically market that skill. And that's my presentation. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
When you started talking a little about exploratory testing, you said the word quantity or quantify.
Right.
Why do you feel that most companies feel like they need to put a number against testing in terms of quantity?
Well, as you're saying, you are what you measure. And I think for a lot of companies, how do you measure progress? And unfortunately, if you're in a very small company, everyone knows each other. And we're a small company, we know each other. I know the quality of work that our testers will do. Imagine you're in a much larger company, or unfortunately, if you imagine you're an outsourced QA company, and you come in to test a banking application. You don't work for the bank. There's a testing company. They can go to the client and say, oh, I've got 100 testers, and they're going to run 10,000 scripts, and they're going to have requirements test coverage of 80%. it's easy to go to the management and say that's what you're doing. The problem with this is going to be, how do you quantify it?
But why do you feel like that needs to be quantified?
Because I think, unfortunately, it's easy otherwise for people to start saying, well, you should be running the scripts. So, for example, we have a tester who's very gifted at testing. What do we have her do? How do we know how much is left to do? So for us, I mean, I'm being cynical about the big outsourced testing company. In general though, when you're about to release a product, you really want to know what is quality, when it's done, how close are we to being done? And unfortunately, we often resort to metrics. So the question is, I guess, how do you measure when you're ready to release? And as a tester, you're always going to find things that are there. The problem is you don't know, have you found the worst one, or are you just one step away from the worst one? So it's finding metrics to know how to do that, I guess.
So here's my suggestion actually. Have you read any of James's box of rapid software testing?
I personally haven't.
Okay. So it's a struggle that I also face a lot. People like numbers, but to be honest, I don't really feel the numbers that they're really looking for or they're asking for to provide a lot of value. So I've experimented a few ways of not trying to use metrics, or at least as minimal as possible. And I kind of always refer back to James Box's recommendation of the concept of a low-tech dashboard. So that might be something to look towards. There's definitely numbers you can use for exploratory testing, like how much effort, like how much time, and things like that. Maybe number of issues that you resolved and what that goes into. But I think there is a terrible stigma around testing, which is probably preventing it from being taken a little more seriously because people try to wrap metrics around it, when, to be honest, they don't really make sense. Is.
Just to add on, I'm interested to hear more about the technique that you were just talking about, but I was just going to add that I think there's an extra stigma or a little bit of antagonism toward people who naturally gravitate, whether it's officially their job or not, to people who, as you say, can look at a product and find the bugs. Exploratory testing, basically, to the extent quantification is involved, they can keep mysteriously increasing the denominator on your percentage of bugs that have been addressed, and that tends to kind of not make anyone happy if they look at that sort of through blinders.
Well, you're the harbinger of bad news.
At some point, a lot of people are tempted to say, stop it, and stop finding problems.
But if you don't, the customers will.
Absolutely. I think that big picture, this can all be handled, one hopes, and because certainly customers are open to that kind of reasoning.
Before, when we were a much smaller company, we didn't have any testers. Anyone who wasn't a developer being a tester. So we were all developers. We kind of cross-tested. And when we released the version, we were only like 3 people. We just didn't have anyone. And so what would happen is we released the software, and the metric, and it's not really a metric, was that customers would keep finding stuff. And they would find stuff that we didn't even know existed. So now we have people doing these activities. It's not it's qualitative. But the qualitative metric is, we no longer have any customers finding anything we don't know about. They'll might say, oh, the system did this, and we'll go, oh yeah, we know about that, it's planned for this next version, it was important but not high enough. But whether we decide to address it or not, that's a business decision, but we never were surprised by anything. And I think number of surprises per week went from 20 to maybe 0. And that's not, that's a metric, it's kind of fake metric. But it's kind of emotionally how we felt, that before, we knew we're going to go live. There's one customer, we had a German tester, and so he was incredibly disciplined. He would find stuff like, wow, this guy's finding everything. And our metric now is, if we can release a software and this guy Helmut does not find a single bug in a week, we've done a great job. And that is our new metric. And and to us, that we have pride in that. And I think before we had people doing this kind of testing, he would find 5 problems in the first day. He would love to. It's almost like a game with him. And so it's a qualitative metric, but for us, we have a lot more pride in quality, and the feedback from the customers has been we don't find problems.
How does this scale? Because one of the things you said is that you did like some government or some
Right.
airplanes or something like
Yeah,
that.
back in the day.
And I heard a presentation just 2 weeks ago, and there's CMM whatever, and they collected metrics out, and I'm even looking at I'm listening to this and just saying, well, are you kidding me? And they got all these statistical models, et cetera, like that. I mean, how does this scale from doing what you're doing, which is, I don't know, it's relatively small, to
Sure.
scale up?
And that's maybe, and we went to a conference in New York, and so they call it session-based testing. They sort of describe what we kind of were doing, which is that if you want to take free-form testing, whatever name it is, but you want to give a little bit of structure to it, not because you want to contain it, but it's just so you can direct it. Maybe that's the word I would use. And we found that was helpful. And some of our customers, they don't want to write test cases and test steps, but they want to make sure that all their testers are covering the system well. You've got a huge system. You've got hundreds of people working on it. They just want to make sure that everyone's working at different areas, they're covering different cases, they're not missing things. And so they found with session-based testing, we give someone discrete sessions based on a user story, but you're not telling them how to test the story. You're just saying, you're testing this story, these are the kind of objectives you'd like you to meet. But then you're on your own still, and then you have these different objectives. You can still make sure you're getting coverage, but you're not telling the tester to follow a set of steps that anyone can follow. At least that's what we've seen some of our customers do.
So when you go from the number of people, like 5 resources to
Right.
50 and on up, et cetera, and how do you, I guess, integrate, put that all together? So for me, it's as a director or VP or whatever, look down and say, well, hey,
Well, so I suppose I would think of it this way: is if you had, say, you were 20 testers, 100 testers, say you were 100 testers, and so let's say you've got 4 or 5 different modules, each doing different sprints, each 2-week sprints. So you have maybe 5 to 10 testers per sprint, let's say, all working in parallel on different parts of the system. One branch together, and the other things haven't been explored. So that was kind of the way, that's the way our customers are doing it, I would say. I'm not the bigger customers.
Does anybody else have an answer to that? From your experience?
Exploratory testing or?
But scaling.
Scaling, the question on scaling.
I have a follow-up
Okay,
question.
sure.
How do you build, lost my word. How do you build credibility in a large-scale model in terms of session testing? Like, how do I say, yes, I did test it and I didn't spend a week and didn't find a bug? So how do you show accountability when you scale it?
I can answer the question, but at least it's going to talk more about session-based testing and some of the challenges and testing. Let me hold off till we get Lisa's talk. I want to steal that thunder, if that's all right.
Just another more general
Yeah,
thing,
please.
kind of getting to what you guys were talking about quantifying, but for us at least, we made a general rule, because Agile is supposed to be, right, one of the things was like, is it shippable? Is it in a shippable state?
Right.
And so I find leading my team of testers, they'll find all these interesting bugs, but it's shippable. So it's kind of balancing this act now of that passion that you were talking about, this German guy that gets all amped up about.
Yes, he is.
Right, so I also have a few people like that, but then it's balancing, well, okay, actually this is shippable, we'll look at these bugs. Some might get prioritized, but a lot of them don't.
But you want to know about them first. The difference,
We want to,
that was
and
the
I like
difference.
your thing about, but there are no surprises.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, we know, we like, he's going to log 5 emails today, and we know what they're going to be. In fact, they often are. We literally say, he's going to compare this, this, and this. 5 years ago, he logs 5 things, we have no idea what's coming. That's the difference. It isn't that you're going to fix them, but you want to know about them.
Right.
That's the big
But
difference.
then there's, in your sprint though, it's like, well, it meets AC, like, gotta ship.
Right,
So it's
absolutely.
like, well, and then it's knowing, okay, I'm gonna make like probably a quick outline of what I'm gonna test.
Mhm.
I'm not doing this big test plan,
Right.
test cases anymore, but some structure so that there is some coverage. That's
Well, and it
what we
was
do.
interesting for us because we sell a test management solution. That's one of our solutions, and we're like, wow, we have a problem. We sell a test management system, but we have a hard time using it because we don't write scripts.
Right.
So we found for us session-based testing, and we were able to model it into our tool. And for us, our tool gives us the way to actually measure some of how we do it without being 1,000 test cases with 1,000 test steps, which is not the point. So that was interesting. Let's see the other question. I want to hand it over to Elise. Who's going to come up and talk? Person will find stuff that we didn't know existed.
I'm the one he was referring to. And some of you were probably like that too. I wanted to ask, out of everybody here, a show of hands, like, how many of you are what you would consider testers? That's your main thing that you do. So, like half-ish. And of you guys as your team, say like 5.
Definitely, there was only 3 of us, but globally we had 13 people out of 500. So.
How about you?
So multiple projects, the largest project is probably about 6 people, and it's international.
Mhm.
And Philippines, all over.
So even the testing team isn't geographically together.
On some projects now, like in UK and Philippines now.
Right. Who else?
We're 12 based in French Heights.
Oh, and Paul, did you say? testing?
7.
And Ruby?
Well, we used to be a team of 15, New York and DC.
Did you raise your hand?
Yeah. We have about 12 people in our DC office, and then we have another office in Indy and then a few people in San Francisco. So I'm not sure what the total is, but a lot.
Oh, more than 5, so.
Yeah.
All right, I'm thinking. So I want to tell you guys how we use our own tool called Spire Team currently to do this session-based testing and record the results. The way we do it works for us because we have such a small team. So and we're also the testers and developers work very closely together, both physically and just on a daily basis. I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly, from my experience, how it does scale, because I think you would have to make some adjustments. But it just gives you something to think about, and if you have ideas, then I'll want to hear about those. You sounded like you had something related to that. So do you guys who consider yourself testers, are you integrated, are you on this, like, sort of in small teams with developers, or is your whole team the testers and the developers are in like a separate team?
It's a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think the way most people are is that if you're not integrated with your team, you should be. But it's mostly like you're integrated with the team, and then you might, if you're lucky, have other testers with you. But I think the way people want it to be is that it's leaner. So one tester to, I've heard, for me, I was one tester to 50 people. So that's not very lean. But I would say it's not uncommon for one tester to support 15 people, unfortunately.
Okay, so I don't know, maybe.
How do you do that?
It's not uncommon. It's not very uncommon anymore. So
Our
I would say
ratio
it's
is
ideal.
usually like 1 to 5.
Like, so for any one project,
Like 1 QA to 5
right, and you're like,
and they're all, we have about 6 what we call pillars, they're pods for agile teams. So you have a product designer, QA, engineer, all sitting together.
Oh, okay.
And they're all, like, we have 6 and they're all based on whatever our corporate goals are. So
Okay.
they're all structured that
well
way.
then
And then we
actually,
have a guild that is QA across the board that I manage. So I manage each tester, but we all are split out.
oh, then.
So that's
I mean,
an answer maybe for scaling of structure, but
right, maybe then what I say will be applicable because it's what that one person would do.
exactly. So my testers are still working in a small integrated team, like you're describing.
Right. Did anybody else want to say anything about that? Okay, so let's see. All right, what am I going to tell you about? Let's see, I guess we already talked about it. So, okay, so if you're not going to write all your test scripts in advance and have them approved by management and then execute them start to finish and then you're done, if you're going to do them kind of at the same time as development's going on and things are going to be changing and things, so that's totally not going to work. There's another way you can do it, which is just sort of just do stuff, test stuff, and then tell people in a very informal way. Scribble it on the whiteboard, scribble it on your notepads. And
How many of those do you have in your office?
I still scribbled on the notepads, but I'm old school, but I don't leave anything important on there. Or, let's see, you guys probably have different practices that you go through, like, I don't know, if a short meeting at the end of every day to go over things or something like that. There's not one way that's the best to do it. But we said, okay, well, me just writing things on a notepad that no one else can look at, and even I can't look back at it and find out what I did and when, is not the best. What can we do? Hey, cool, we have a tool, our own tool that we are developing and selling to other people who test software. Why don't we use it? But like Adam said, it's sort of the most obvious way to use it is to create a test case, test steps, and each step has tells you what to do, what should happen, and then when you're running it, you write what did happen, actual result. So, but the session-based testing, we figured out a different way to do it. It's very similar, but you just basically create a bunch of test cases that just say this area, and maybe 3 lines, 3 steps, like test it with this parameter, this parameter, and that parameter, and it should work. That's it. Then you run it, and as you're doing it, you type a lot more in that actual result about what you did and what you saw. And so, like one of our products, our help desk product, has what we call the let's see, let me check my notes here. We call it the external home page. And so I had written external home page and 3 steps, check it when not logged in, when logged in as a customer role, when logged in as a user role. So it's 3 steps. Then as I did it, I said, well, I checked that all the right widgets were there for this. And then in another one, I said, one of the widgets was missing, it should have had this. And another one, I wrote something about, let's see, like there's a search box on the home page, but when I type something in it and it tells me the results and I click on one of them, when I go back to that, that search has disappeared. It doesn't still have a list of like I could go to the next one. Is that, I just wrote like, is that the way it's supposed to be? I wasn't sure, and then I wrote something like, what's that extra box that's there? Is that for anything? Or something. And that's how I actually wrote it. And I don't know about all of you, but I have always ingrained in me, I cannot log an incident or a defect or bug report like that. It has to be a little more thorough, and that I did it with all these different combinations, and this is when something went wrong. So so this system enables this methodology, or whatever you want to call it. I was sort of doing it, but I didn't know there was a name for it. So it gives me a way to type in everything that I saw or observed, even if I wasn't sure if it was right or wrong, and then finish, and that's done. And I didn't hardly take any extra time, from what the time I was going to take anyway doing it. But yet now it's in a web-based tool that my team members can all see literally exactly what I wrote, and can add a comment to it and say, and like the person about the search results, he said, no, that's what it's supposed to be. We took away that extra box, and now the widget's there.
Can you take actually a step back?
Sure.
Because I know you have a slide that says what is the best, what is session-based testing. So can you sort of explain why you chose to go a more session and exploratory route rather than what most people view as a traditional testing route, which is outline all of the things you're going to do and stick to it? So why, in your honest opinion, do you choose to do session-based testing rather than the validation steps?
Well, how do I answer that? Well, you all know this, there's never enough time. You only have so many hours, so the more hours, you do need to spend some hours trying to decide what you're going to do, and then doing it. But you got to keep that to a minimum, because you got a lot to do. And so if you can sort of capture plan out what you're doing, do it, and capture it all, all at the same time, it's just very efficient, and we have such a small team.
And also, what stage
Go ahead.
what stage do you get the requirements in from us?
It's got about 6 words.
Do you want me to edit that out?
No. And what I know is exactly right.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that we don't give you a ton of definition in the first place.
Like we knew there was I knew there was supposed to be some kind of global search on that page. There was, but nobody had said, well, how is it supposed to work? So, I mean, obviously it's implied that if you type something in there in the search, it doesn't give you some kind of error message. It actually gives you what you asked for, all that, and exactly what was the UI supposed to be. Also, we have all the, as Adam spoke about, we already have, so by the time I'm doing this, I'm doing with the daily build that ran overnight, and the unit tests already ran. So the unit tests are sort of like the back end, you know, the underlying stuff, and then I'm testing the UI. So the unit test can completely run. That was something that took me a while to figure out. How does this happen? Why can the unit test run and the thing doesn't work? Because the UI doesn't work. You know, the search term that you put maybe doesn't go anywhere. It just, you know, it's supposed to, but it doesn't. But there was a test that said if the search term gets to where it's supposed to go, the search runs and returns. You know, I don't know if I'm making sense. I think I might be babbling on.
Well, I think because a lot of people, like Adam alluded to, have a misconception of what session-based and exploratory testing is. I've had a challenge, so I used to work in consulting. I actually had a challenge with one of our projects where my team was responsible of just doing a bunch of automation validations, and then they assumed that that was all the testing they needed, which is wrong. And I had to teach this external test team. They're not part of my company, but for the sake of the project, I had to teach them, hey, you know, these are nice checks to have to make sure that we didn't break anything super serious, but you really need to take the time and do this exploratory testing. I don't have time to do it because I'm helping out with all the automation stuff, but I really need your help to do this exploratory testing because, and I think you were alluding to that, the requirements that you usually get are not, they're a good starting point, but they're not the end-all be-all. And you do exploratory and session-based testing to try to figure out the gaps within the requirements, to figure out what did you not do well, and be able to learn and build off of that. So.
Well, and as testers, your management wants you to tell them what is the current state of the system. Good, bad, somewhere in between. It takes a good bit of time to do that, and so you need to, if it can be very efficient to record the results of what you did, then you're able to better report. And if it's, especially if it's in a tool, you don't even have to take any time. They can look at it themselves. They can see exactly what you did if they want to, and see what state you're in, how long it took you, exactly what day you did it. All that is just already there. It's no extra effort.
Can I have one comment? It was interesting. One of the things we found was that before we started using the tool, we would do it on the notepads. If we found you log something in a bug perhaps, and we come into your room and go, hey, Elise, what's going on? Why does it not work? You know, tell us what you did. And now we would go to you and you say, read the test run, then come see me. And 9 times out of 10, we wouldn't bother coming back to disturb you because we actually you had everything we needed. And in fact, one of the guys who works for us said, you know, when I work from home now, I think I get more done because normally when I'm in the office, I keep asking Lisa all these questions, and I work at home, I look at what she wrote, and I go, wow, she's more efficient that way.
Right. And I mean, when we even, most of the time, we're even physically right there, but it still takes a lot of time to just chat about things, and you keep interrupting each other, and it's not efficient, you know.
I did like what you said about, you know, business analyst automation and, you know, the session, because also everybody can't do what you're saying. You have to be skilled. And I'll tell you, when I interview people and I ask them, you know, how do you test this light switch? Usually what I want to hear is do this, 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 this. And even though you're not writing stuff down, I mean, I hear your brain.
It's all.
It's, right. So
and how does somebody know what's up here?
No. But I mean, you have
somewhere.
that innate. You have that. You've developed that skill. You know, and it's not everybody can do it. I mean, I wouldn't give this to let certain people do that because I wouldn't have confidence that they would do what they should be doing.
Right.
You know, so it's a skill I'm sure you can teach.
And you need to know the difference between they spent X number of hours and found one bad problem, and they wasted all that time and they happened to find one problem, and there's so many other problems to find. You know what I mean? Like what you did do.
Well, you're speaking like a really experienced. I mean, I hear it. You know, even though you're not writing it down, you're going through all the steps.
Are you writing down everything you're trying, or are you just filling in the narrative once, you know, you're kind of backfilling the narrative on those occasions when you run and find something of interest?
That's a good question. It's somewhere in between, you know.
Okay. So sometimes you're keeping track of what you're doing so that, you know, the breadcrumbs don't get lost.
Yeah, sometimes you run a test and you know it would pass, and the test case might have said test the global search on Firefox, and you'll have like pages and pages and it's all green because you're writing down everything you did and it all worked, and you did the same thing on Chrome and nothing worked. So and there's value in us having both cases because it's important to know. So you do when
the
time
other
allows.
thing is it's a way of it helps the person who's doing the testing and the other their other teammates, you know, share the work better.
Right.
Because it's more transparent. What's done, what's not done, what happened, how long ago did you do it? That's, you know, you guys probably find the same problem, but it gets frustrating sometimes when you already tested something and then you ignore it for a while because you tested something else, and then when you come back to that thing, you're like, what the heck? Who messed it up? I thought I was done testing that. And so you can kind of look back like, okay, well, what happened? What were the check-ins? You know, if you have a tool that's tracking all that. When did I last test it? You know, kind of reconstruct it.
I think that goes back to why it's important to have a modicum of structure. You don't want to go back to test cases, but when you're doing exploratory or session testing, it's a little bit of structure helps you make sure that you remember which build did you test, so that you can go back over and say, you can go through that past test run and just quickly try it again, even though as a regression test, we often use your exploratory tests as new regression tests to make sure we did break it.
And then you can also iterate it. The second, third, fourth time you run it, you can add more steps, add more detail based on what you had found for the trouble areas.
And sometimes you might even put a comment in saying, oh, I need to look at this next time. You will say like, I know there's problems in this area, I'm going to come back to this.
Or I can add a step to the test case and not execute that step that time, but the next time I run it, I execute that step. And our tool will show you exactly the date, you know, at the result.
So I have a couple questions. So I don't want to take away too much time. Are you going to be able to show us a demo of that, or are you going to?
We're not set up for that, but if everybody,
we
can always do it in the future.
Well, you offers
Oh,
the one. We hadn't planned on doing a demo of the system. We were trying to keep this completely vendor neutral.
Okay, so my second question I had is, how do you fit it in your? How do you actually fit it in your iteration? So one of the troubles I've always had implementing this more subjective form of testing. Because to be honest, this is really, if I had to choose between what I do in terms of creating automation validations or actually doing this, I mean, automation validations they're really just confidence boosters. You don't really do testing because your scripts are not going to go off by themselves and mutate and become smarter by themselves unless you are really good at machine learning. So they are unfortunately just very dumb. So if you are continually using validation checks as your primary source of, this is what's working, you're always going to end up failing. Because you're not going to ask the question in terms of like, what happens if someone presses the back button during this stage? What happens? And unless you want to invest in that, again, you already touched on that there's a cost, right? There's a cost to how proficient do you want your automation scripts to be about giving you those confidence boosters. So then then you're like, well, let's actually do, in my honest opinion, actual testing, which is to do the exploratory session-based activities, and to really find and prove that your requirements, at least what you've created, proves your requirements. So the struggle that I usually have, and this kind of counts to how do you make it scalable, right? How do you fit this into your iterations? And so again, this is actually a conversation you need to have with your teams, because if you're going to have this back and forth, you're going to realize you have to reduce what you put in your iterations. You're going to have to reduce the scope of work because it takes more work to actually prove the work you're doing is actually what you're expecting it to be. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. They think of, oh my gosh, that means we're going to go back. We're going to move back on deadlines. We promise that we're going to do this, which, to be honest, if you're doing that, you're probably not doing true Agile. So I've had a lot of conversations with people and companies where they're like, I would rather release half my functionality and know it's working completely, rather than deploy everything and only half of it works. So it's a conversation you need to have with your team about, if you want to fit this kind of actual, like, into my honest opinion, the thing that's really going to help you find issues working in your application. It's a conversation you need to have with your team, because it has to be a team effort. You're probably the only person doing this activity, but I would suggest that, anyone can actually do exploratory testing. You don't necessarily have to be a tester. The thing that you really need to be is someone who can think critically. So if you're able to ask questions and you're able to think creatively, you can do exploratory testing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it just reminded me when you were asking before about why do you want to even have metrics and things like that, because there is a lot of sort of art to it that it's hard to define. And because of that, it's good to get different people's point of view and trying things, because, everybody's mind works in different ways. So,
And we had that struggle last week. We were about to go live, and you told me there's no way. So we delayed it a week.
Because what you guys probably all struggle with this. You don't want to release it with sort of some big mysteries and some parts where you didn't get a chance to explore. It's okay if there's some mysteries in some little tiny obscure corners, but if there's been some chunks that are a little mysterious, they haven't been fully characterized right now, then you don't want to go there.
Well, what happened to us was we had the product all pretty well tested. We were in good shape. We've had a massive performance bug. We went onto the production environment. So now we had to recode a whole bunch of the back end to make the production work, which touched a large part of the system. So even though everything had been tested and gone green, these was basically, you kept finding these huge holes that really were one or two big deep root causes, but we just didn't know how much we were going to find.
To fix the performance, you had to try to not send as much information, so then there were strange things when you tried to do something.
Does that uncover a weakness or a trade-off there? Because that sounds like maybe some of those things could have been detected through whatever more investment in those difficult to maintain UI scripts.
Yeah. Well, what happened in this case was interesting. We tested it. We said, okay, well, we're not going to test it on the build machine. We're going to test it on a realistic environment. So we replicated the final environment partly. We replicated the web server, but we had a database server that was more powerful. And we didn't fully appreciate the difference until we had this beta site, which was supposed to be a closed replica, and our environment wasn't a good replica. That was the problem. And it was really strange. It was actually the memory of the database server, nothing else, that made the difference. There was some caching we were doing, which was uniquely compromised on a small RAM database server. That was the only difference, and that was the unfortunately crucial difference. So the lesson learned for us was, if you're going to do testing on final environment, it has to be an exact replica, not just a close enough machine to be lying around that it's got the same version of the operating system and the same CPUs, but different memory, which is what happened.
That's where that's more of the QA as opposed to the testing. That you've designed a way to get testability that will be true, to reality. And we learn, but like most people, learn by making mistakes and saying,
Right.
We're going to test that in a very much closer environment to the realistic, a little sooner in the process.
So I have a question for you, which is when you approach your session, exploratory testing bits, how do you prepare for it?
Coffee, I was thinking. Do you mean for a specific objective, or for a whole sprint?
Just in general, in terms of how do you it could be in terms of how do you approach it in terms of maybe planning it for sprints. How then do you personally do planning for it? Because for me, I realized to do this really well, And one of the things that people forget is that, you know, in Agile, it requires you to be a lot more disciplined, which means there's a lot more planning involved. So to make sure that you're able to get the information you need. So how do you try to approach it? Most people have different strategies.
You know, I don't. Obviously, the most important thing is to look at whatever is new, and or redesigned or changed first. And probably the next level is the sort of very basic part of the functionality, even if you didn't change it, but making sure it didn't break. And just jot that all down, and then.
Do you make charters? Do you do any of that?
Well, say again, charters?
Do you do charters? No?
Not so much, no.
What is a charter?
So going a little bit back to James' box. So charters are a way for you to sort of set the foundation of what your session-based testing is. So it allows you to, since you talked a little bit about the documentation, it's really kind of tricky to do that, especially because, you know, this kind of testing is very fluid, and so it's kind of hard to sort of detail that fluidity. But the charter, if you want to think about it, is kind of like your little exploratory test plan and sort of slightly strategy, where you want to talk about, like, you know, what this session is focused on doing what, and then how are you going to do it, what environment are you going to do it in, what tools you're going to use, how long are you going to do it, and then if you want as well, you can put all your information in there as well. But it's a way for you, when you are ready to start, you can just tell your team very quickly in a very small snippet. Like, so they call it a charter because it's, you think about it, back in the day for explorers, they have a charter which tells them exactly what's the goal.
Well, I think I'm a little weak on that area.
It sounds a lot like the branches of your cake.
Yeah, I think what you're doing, I think when you set the requirement, you write the test. We're using a test case because that's the tool we're using. But when you write that test case, you will write something like, I'm going to go test global search today. I want to cover the major browsers. I'm not going to go too deep on this, and this, because I know it's not ready, and I'm going to spend an hour or two doing it. I mean, not maybe as much detail as a charter, but I think that's what you're doing. It's not called a charter, but for you it's a test case, I think, for us.
I think it's not about testing at all. I think you guys, since you're a developing company, you can afford to work without BA. So while you're testing, you're doing inventing, not inventing, you're writing something new.
Right.
For us, like testers, we have to work with BA to give us requirements. So I think you represent not like a regular form of SDLC, in my opinion, you know.
Well, I mean, remember, our software is being used by thousands of people, and we're not changing 100% of it every release. We're changing 10% of it, and we have users who expect it to work the same way. So even though I would say we don't have a huge scale in terms of the number of people, in terms of the number of requirements that have changed, there's a huge number of requirements that mustn't change. And so I think there's a huge amount of testing being done. We're not just inventing. I mean, maybe 10 years ago we were inventing. Now we invent 10% of the system, but we've got to maintain the other 90% still works, and doesn't break, and doesn't have side effects. And I remember our clients are testers, so if anyone's going to find it, if they're going to find one number's off on a count, on a report, they will come to us. So for us, I would say we're not just inventors at all. Oh, I wish we were inventors.
We may be maybe more like what a company does that's young and small.
Maybe trying to move from developers to the testers and talk with development and inventing new stuff.
Sure. Because we're small, we don't have a BA. Basically the developers, and basically when we...
You didn't eliminate him yet.
What's that?
You didn't eliminate BA yet.
The thing is that, like, BA should be working closely with testers anyways, because we're going to be the ones that tell them what they didn't say.
Right.
So it's, if anything, you want to find these issues because you want to mitigate risk, right? So
it's
you have to...
in the standard, like SDLC form right now, Java form, right? But
I don't think anyone really
said,
follows its standard. Like I know people like to say standard software development lifecycle, but it's really is a guideline. Everyone's going to have different things that they're going to inject. And then if right now, like sort of like the testing world, like people are trying to redefine it a little bit, because you can't just, like, why does testing have to be after this particular part? Why can't testing be done further to the left? So then how do you try to get that further to the left?
Yeah, so one of the things we'll always do when we start a new sprint or a new release, we'll always have all of us in the room. So some of us, at least, is always in the room at the beginning. We do a whiteboard before we put anything in the tool. We want to have it on the whiteboard. At least is part of that conversation when we're describing, hey, this new version, customers are telling us this. At least we're like, because Elise does support too. So she's dealing with customers day in, day out. She's like, that customer, if we could do this one feature, she would love us. And she's like, if you're going to change that, I know we've had tons of problems with that in the past, you got to make sure we describe it well, because it's going to break everything else.
So,
for example.
How do you do regression testing? So you've done you said you've got all these requirements which mustn't change.
Right.
You want to do regression testing, and you're not going to do all that manually. You're going to automate, right? Or what are you guys doing, and how does the person who's automating understand what you have done, or what? They have to look at.
I wish we could automate more, and we could. Time-wise, we automate the unit tests, all the code level, and we automate all the APIs and all the services. We don't automate currently any of the UI, and we have a tool that does UI testing. So we certainly have a tool. It's more the time. That's that cost, that time to do it. The UI has been changing a lot. We're always worried about spending too much time.
It's expensive.
But on the other hand, I think so. What we'll do is we try and write good unit tests that will dig deep and aren't just the happy path. And if we find a unit test that's failed, what we also do is it's like a charter for the charter. When we see a unit test that fails, at least we'll go, this unit test failed today, guys. You guys said it's working, and I think you guys need to look into it. And we'll look into that, and we'll then give her a charter that, based on what that unit test says, we know there's something lurking in that part of the system. It helps us sometimes find.
So you're running all this at 90 build?
Yeah, we do have all that
framework.
And I would say, as you back to what Cynthia said, is that it's a great way to find problems, but it doesn't fall. It may be, but it certainly isn't going to solve it all. You have to have someone going out there. But for us, it can be a useful canary in the mine, finding the gas leak.
What time is it?
Oh, we are 8:30.
Yeah, I was about to say we probably should. I don't want to rush you. So.
Well, I want to make sure Simon gets a chance to say his parts. And,
do you want to do it? Or want to go straight to it?
So I think we kind of already covered pretty much what's on this slide. There's pluses and minuses for doing it the way we're doing it, and right now, and I'm sure we will improve it as time goes on.
We did have another slide too, but we skipped over it.
Oh, I moved to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and some of them are the same problems that you have with any methodology or any communications where there's a communication gap. What you wrote is not what they are reading, and that's a...
So I am actually planning on doing a talk on exploratory testing. So if you've never done it, this is a good one. If you would like to participate, I would love to get your feedback.
That'd be great.
So, should I just
move
it on to Simon? Here he is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Simon, I'm a software engineer at Inflectra, and we've had a lot of great ideas and thoughts, and my brain is hurting from trying to understand exploratory testing more, though Elise and I work very closely together. So what you're going to find out in the next few minutes is I'm a typical developer. I'm really light in substance, and I'm really heavy on stupid kits. So, take the moment to decompress, and I'm not going to talk that much. I can if you want, but this is for you to, continue the interactive discussion we've been having, but on a bit of a lighter note. And I want to address the important topic of developers versus testers. I think about half of you here are testers, maybe some of the other half are involved in development. And I think that it can often feel like we're at war with one another. That there's developers on one side, and it's always an us versus them. And I want to talk about, what is it that makes the cat want to fight each other, or the dog want to fight itself in the mirror, and how can we work better together? So an important part of actually being able to work together is knowing who we each are. So I want to talk about how do testers view themselves, and how do maybe developers think about testers, and then vice versa. How do developers think about themselves, and how do testers, half of you guys, think about the developers? And then think how can we actually improve that understanding to make sure we get along better? So first of all, how does a tester think of themselves? And this, I think, sums it up. I don't know if you can read it at the back. This is a Far Side cartoon. Anyone know Gary Larson's Far Side? This is from, back in the day. And at the bottom it says, we should write that spot down. And you've got a couple of cave people shooting and killing a woolly mammoth. And for me, I'll start this one off by explaining what I think it is. I think testers like to see themselves as the adventurer explorer. You talked about charters, like literally seeing yourself as an adventurer explorer, going out into the wilderness, finding the great beast, and creating that perfect test that brings the beast down in one fatal shot.
That's actually
done that.
That's actually not the image I had in my mind. But
Oh, no.
okay.
What image do you have in your mind?
It's the Justice League.
The Justice League?
Yeah.
any particular, just any of them?
No, yeah, there's I don't know if you've seen, but there's like someone made a spreadsheet kind of about like, testers, UX, project managers, blah. And then it's in terms of like, so how each other sees each other. So we get to the tester, QA one, it's the Justice League. Like,
Okay. Cool.
but that's interesting too. That's a good one.
Slightly more insulting to testers, don't get offended. How do developers think about testers? Do you see that? If anyone has to guess, this is maybe just how my brain works. The cat, by the way, is the tester. And the
Not
train
the
is
train.
part of the code that's been developed.
Yeah.
Anyone want to think, like, what defines a developer's perspective on a tester? Anyone want to insult yourself?
Blocker.
Blocker.
Grumpy.
Well, for me as a developer, no, I do this. Like, I've made a model train. It's supposed to go around in a circle. Dear tester, QA, please find out, does my train go in a circle? And no, it doesn't. I broke it. It doesn't go around in a circle. Back to you, development team. So, that cat really is very apathetic. Next important step, how do developers think of themselves? And I fell back to Bob Ross. I don't quite have the hair for it right now. Developers, I think, we like to see ourselves, we're the creators of this new modern world, and we're so creative, wonderful, and really quickly, which is Bob Ross' speciality, we can create something beautiful that brings people happiness. And we don't even make any bugs. There's no such thing as a bug. If we do something wrong, it's just a happy accident. We meant to do it. It's better than there was before. Okay, last one, and this is a bit of a stretch, but I just really wanted to put the funny picture in. How do testers think about developers? See, it does make it. It does it completely arse backwards, as I'd say in the UK. But it does manage to get there. I don't know, do any of you have like a better image for what would define a developer in a bad way? That's good enough.
I'll send you that spreadsheet.
Send me the
I'll
spreadsheet,
send you
yeah.
that spreadsheet.
Yeah. So how many of you in the last sprint or couple of sprints has felt like one of these Labradors before the sprint got released? One is the developer, one is the tester, that guy at the back, that's going to be the manager. And then your loggerheads with your team. Anyone got loggerheads with your developers? Is there stress? Are all things fine? Hands up if there's been stress. Stress, a little bit of stress, a little bit of stress. So maybe there's stress, don't want to admit it. And how many of you hands up have been like Finn and Jake? At the end of the sprint, you go like, high five your developer or high five your QA team. Okay, so we've got mixed, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was talking to Elise about this before, and I was like, how many, did you have a high five? She's like, I don't even know if I ever want there to be a high five. Do you think you do want there to be high five moments? You're always going to be like, well, I know we did okay, but I know there's stuff that I missed. And I know therefore, developers done their job, but I've always, there's no perfection that doesn't exist. The developer thinks there's perfection. Testers maybe never think there's perfection. But in my head, I'd like to think that we could be getting to more of these high five moments. I think I'm going to beat Jake, by the way. Any ideas about how to get to more high five moments between developers and testers to break down being the dogs that just always in tension, never too stubborn to change, and to actually get to a happy place?
Don't end sprint on Friday.
Just really communicate. That's really what comes down to it, is that everyone has the same goal. We want to feel good about what we did. So as long as you're honest about your communication, you don't purposely try to surprise people, and if you do, admit to mistakes if there are mistakes on both sides, and just kind of really have empathy for each other. I personally have not had the experience where I've worked with people who I felt like they were doing this on purpose in terms of not performing their best. Like everyone You know, if you're in software, you have a reason to be in software. You're very interested in it. So, you know, you have, for me, like high five moments are because, like, you know, we have a common struggle and we're all trying to make it to the finish line together. So, you know, if my developer did something really awesome, high five. If someone else did something really great on the team, went beyond, give them a high five. That's really all I have to say. So, it sounds simple, but it's hard to get there.
The one thing I would like to say is that if you didn't care, if neither party cared, there wouldn't be the conflict. The conflict is usually because both parties cared so much. Say we were in the office, the tester really cares. This is not ready, and it's they can't bear to see you go out. And then the developer has come to me at the same time, the same day. He's put his heart and soul into building this thing. He just wants to get out. He just can't. It's been so long in the making in his head. He just wants to get it out, and it's like he just can't. It's like that train. He can't get past the cat, and he wants to get past the cat, and he doesn't really blame the cat, but the cat's in the way. And it's sort of like, and the cat's view is that behind me there's a break in the bridge. If you go, it's going to go off the bridge. So, but if neither party cared, there wouldn't be the conflict. They would just go home, not give a whatever. It wouldn't matter. So usually when there's conflict, it's because there's passions, because they care. At least not happy. That's it.
I would say is that, you know, with estimation is that, you know, the industry is horrible at doing estimations, and even in Agile, you know, and you know, I've seen teams, they don't use burn down charts, or they're not looking at velocity and adjusting, etc. I mean, developers are always optimistic, you know, and they underestimate what it takes. And then, you know, QA people, you come in with a big number, and which usually QA people are really, they're different styles, and that's one of the things is, you know, really kind of things are changing now in the industry, but you know, developers build things, QA people not like to see knock it down. But as far as QA people usually have a big view of how everything works, and they're very good at scheduling and planning, etc. like that. But from a management point of view, it's just managing this whole thing. Even though you get something done, it's still got to ride on a system somewhere. You got to do the environment. You got to do all these other things, and you know, when the higher up people are making plans, they don't always consider all that stuff. It's always, and a lot of times, you know, well, you should know. You know, you're never going to meet the schedule, and it's due from the beginning. I'm just on large projects. I mean, you kind of know that.
Yeah,
so I'd say it's estimation, and you really have to train, you know, the team in estimation. And if you're doing Agile, and a lot of people use flavors of Agile, but you really need to use the tools that they provide. So anyway.
Interesting. Yeah, that means if you have unrealistic expectations put on you, whoever you are collectively as a team, then that's going to introduce stress, which is going to hinder everyone getting along. Even anyone on the team is going to make it harder.
Just having some metric like the what Adam mentioned about the number of calls that you get from customers per week. I don't know what. Obviously, that's different depending on the product, but to get to the high five, if you don't want to train people high-fiving because they got past the cat, but rather, they're high-fiving the cat, then you need to have, or always try to work toward a balance that people more or less share of, velocity, basically, quantity and quality. A lot of times I find, you have this linguistically built-in sprint. It's like fast, add features. The testing part, as you saw when you checked Pinterest, that's not really integral.
Supposed to be.
Yeah, but psychologically, I guess, it's often forgotten. So, including the quality bar somehow in recognizing what you've produced in the end, rather than just the length of that list of features and changes that you've accomplished.
I'd certainly view it for my own code that I do, at least for test very qualitatively. Like, I want to make a feature that's good and people are going to like. And if they don't like it because it's broken because of something I don't spot, that's not a successful feature. But if release finds a bunch of things that I can then fix it and make it better before release, then that's good. And if we have to delay release because I've got to fix something, then it's annoying to fix bugs, clearly. It's annoying because I made the bug, and I'm annoyed at myself for having not fixed it in the first place. But it does mean it's better because at least I've looked at it and helped still make it better.
I think usability is probably, we haven't even talked about today. But,
So you know, I've been listening to this whole conversation. Business owner, I use software that people book my classes and my camps and stuff like that. The software probably works for people that are highly computer literate. So I get parents calling me all the time who can't book their child into a class, you know? Well, 60% of parents did, but 40% ran into a problem. The software's not broken, it works. It just doesn't work for 40% of people, right? So this comes to this whole usability thing, like trying to test that somebody doesn't see on the top right-hand corner of the screen as a little highlighted box that they need to click on next. You know, they can't see it. They look all around the screen and they called me. Did you check the top right-hand corner? Oh, there it is. So it's sort of like the software's not broken, but you know.
Usability testing? Yeah,
well,
it's definitely.
Yeah, human computer interaction, whatever.
Definitely. Well, everyone, there's different opinions on usability testing. Like, where does it actually fit? But yeah, I mean, a lot of it probably, but that's the thing. So if you do more subjective forms of testing, like exploratory testing, usability testing, I would even say like performance and security testing are also subjective as well, slightly. But again, it's a conversation you need to have with your team that goes back to the kind of the root cause, which is I feel everyone has these problems because they don't effectively communicate. They kind of just keep it all within themselves and they don't share it, either because they don't feel that they're supported in it or they're scared. But really, truly, in my experience, if you want to succeed in Agile, you have to be a good communicator. And that's really, I know I'll keep going back to it, but it's true. Like, if you kind of want to, if you think about sort of the problems that you have in your teams, I would probably guarantee you a lot of it comes down to communication, because somewhere along the line, someone didn't communicate to someone else, and then you're kind of stuck in an awkward situation.
So to piggyback on that point is something I've been thinking about this whole time is with your initial point there of how do you get to the high five moment, it seems to me as a novice that it would come down to rapport. You know, you have to see your tester as not the bad guy. You have to see the tester as someone who's helping you make a better product. And then if you know you're both working together as a team and you're really focused on that, then that to me will blend to a high five right away. You know, like, hey, you caught that bug, awesome, now we can ship it, let's do it.
Yeah, it definitely seems easier in a small team. Like, we're a small team based, a couple of you based in these small little pods, you said they were called. Pillars, yeah.
They've been built.
It definitely seems easier. There's a few people who generally have the same, Adam spoke about our why, so we're there enjoying the job for the same reason. And if we're in a tiny team working on a product, I think that makes the communications and rapport much easier to build. I used to be not doing software with very big teams, and communications are very difficult if you're in a massive hierarchy organization. And it's easy just to fall back to relying on the hierarchy rather than actually talking to somebody. Whereas in a small company, all it is talking to each other and getting the work done. So.
It's helped us a lot for inter-team communication, collaboration. I know buzzwords, but they really do talk a lot more. They get excited about what they're doing, and they do sprint planning, so we follow Scrum ceremonies, and they really do decide like on that sprint's goals and definition of done as a team, like in the done column after QA on the board. Like, it includes QA as well, so that's really important. Upfront expectations they're aligned on. And we discuss our test strategy at the beginning too with them. And we alleviate a lot of what maybe would have been bugs at that point. It really helps to discuss that up front, so devs are like, oh yeah, like I'll think about that when I code it, and QA is starting to brainstorm. It helps flesh out the AC the product is writing, so it really helps the entire team do better.
Yeah. So I think
not just developers.
Yeah, the last one we did with one of our expiring with Elise, because we had two features that were both pretty easy. Like, let's do both. And Elise was like, no, they might be easy to code, but they're both going to be horrendous to test.
Exactly.
Pick one.
Yep.
And we picked one, and that was
Right.
That's the system working. Yeah.
We actually include QA in our estimates now. estimates are an estimate. That's something to remember. They're supposed to be an abstract thing, right? Don't do time-based estimates. We use points-based, and they should include QA as well for that exact reason. We actually were doing dev only, and we would get things turned into QA very, very late after those 2 weeks, and it's like, okay, we can't show.
Because your time's free.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
No more
Thanks so
cats?
much. Yeah.